are going to be looking at how to create a bit of a complex dart manipulation process on our front bodice. I'm Minerva and I'm going to be talking you through how to do this step by step today. We're going to have lots of fun, so come on, join me and let's do it. We're going to be rotating and moving our bust dart and also our waist dart to create a really fun asymmetric look to our top. This is quite a complex dart manipulation process. In the previous videos, we've done some reasonably simple ones of just rotating the dart around. However, I did want to show you something a little bit more complex because that will then give you the tools to start analysing and creating your own blocks, moving those darts around however you want. So I hope you find this really helpful. As ever, you will need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me. We're only going to be adapting our front bodice block, not our back one. So you're going to trace over one front bodice, and then you're going to trace over it again so that you've got a duplicate of it, and pop those two side by side and sellotape them together. The very first thing we want to do is close up our waist darts. So let's do that together now. Find the midpoint of your waist darts and then join that point up to the apex using a nice straight line. Draw in a new dart from the waistline up to the apex. Use a pair of scissors to then remove the volume of both those two waist darts, making sure to cut up your new line that you've just drawn for your new dart ending at the apex. Next, you want to open up the volume up here, so we're going to remove the volume of the bust darts as well. Let's close up this dart first. Pivot it at the apex and just close it up. Do the same for this dart over here. Pivot the whole thing around. Perfect, so the volume of our waist darts has now been accommodated in our bust darts up here. What that means is we can start to manipulate the space down here because we haven't got any darts in the way. So take your pattern drafting ruler and draw a line from about a third of the way up the side seam straight to the apex of this side over here. Take your scissors and just cut along that line, leaving a pivot point at the apex. Then we're going to close up that shoulder. Take a new sheet of paper and just pop it underneath your block now. Let's find the center point of this massive dart. So take the center point between these 2 points here where the dart legs have opened out and mark a line from the apex to that point. This becomes the center point of your new dart. Now we know that with our darts, we always want the dart point to be at least 2 centimeters away from the apex. So mark a point that is 2 centimeters away from the apex along that center line. And then next you can draw in your new dart line at this point. Brilliant. So we've got our new dart, which is coming in here, and that dart is effectively taking the volume away from the bust there at that point. So it's accommodating the volume change required for this side. At this point, we've got a really fun asymmetric top, haven't we? We've kind of got one line going in that way. We've got another dart coming in there, which is pretty fun. However, I do want to make this a little bit more complicated for you. So let's have some more fun with that second bust dart and see what we can do with that. So what I'm going to suggest is that we simply just close up this dart up here and we reopen up this dart. However, we've got this new line here that we're following for our dart cut line at that point. So what we need to do is cut along this line here, out for your, because you've got paper underneath here, haven't you? And then cut up there to the apex. Wonderful. Okay, so now then just close up that dart at the shoulder point. Grab another piece of paper and put that underneath your pattern piece. Then we're going to find the center point of this new dart so we can drop the dart point 2 centimeters from the apex. So find the center of the base of the dart and then draw a line from there up to the apex. Mark a point along that line that is 2 centimeters from the apex. And then draw in the new legs of your dart. Don't forget that we're following this inner red line here, as that is our dart line for this dart here. Okay, so grab some tracing paper and let's add our seam allowances as required to this pattern piece. So give our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to our shoulder seams. Draw in your arm side. Next, draw in your neckline and then your side seams using a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So on this side here, we have got one part of our seam allowance there, and then the other part is actually all the way down here. Now our waist is actually sort of like a series of angles, isn't it? So really we want to just kind of soften that waist off a little bit so that it's not too abrupt. So just find a nice sort of curve that complements what's going on in that area. This is where the fun bit begins. Okay, so let's draw in our darts, but what we don't want is loads of volume around here. If we cut out the pattern piece and we just cut this whole thing out as one big block and then marked out the darts and sewed them up, we'd end up with loads of fabric all folded up inside the garment, which we just simply don't want. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a seam allowance to these two darts. So we'll start off with the nice simple one here. Don't forget we're following the inner line here up to our new apex point. What I want you to do is to offset a seam allowance along that dart line, running from the side seam up to the center of the dart like that. Next, we're going to do the same with the other side. Again, don't forget we're following the inner line that joins up with the dart, which is offset at that point. So a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance offset to the edge of those dart legs. Perfect. We're going to do the same for this side here. Again, just make sure you're following the right line. So that's all good. Now we're just going to draw in our little dart here, and we're just simply going to follow our lines that we drew, making sure we are joining up the dart at the new location at the point there. Fantastic. So we have added all of our seam allowances, and now we're just going to annotate our pattern piece. Let's do that together now. Okay, so for us, our whole of our top has kind of gone skew-if, hasn't it? It's all kind of tilted that way. Now what I really want is for the majority of the centre front to be along the grain line. So what I'm actually going to do with this pattern piece is I'm going to follow that centre front line here and say this is the grain line. I'm going to mark in the two apex points because we always do that with our pattern, just for clarity. We're calling this the front bodice with asymmetric darts, and we only need to cut one because we've opened out the pattern piece. It's not cut on the fold anywhere. The only other thing that I want to do, just for clarity's sake on my pattern, is actually draw in the dart lines that we have here as well, up to that point there, because I think that might be a little bit confusing otherwise when we sew it up. It just makes it a bit easier. Brilliant. That is such a fun pattern piece, isn't it? It's really exciting. Let's cut that out of our tracing paper and then move on to create our back pattern piece. Brilliant. Once you've done that, then do the same process with your bodice back pattern piece by adding the seam allowances to your block. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to the centre back. Draw in your waist and dart exactly as it is on the block. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to your side seam, and then draw in your arm side exactly as it is. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to your shoulders and draw in your dart. Draw in your neckline. Grain line follows the line of the centre back. Annotate your pattern piece to say that it is the back bodice we need to cut to, and then add your pattern name. Once you've done that, you can cut out your pattern piece. So we've now cut out our pattern pieces out of tracing paper, and we're going to go and cut those out of calico next. So make sure you cut them out nice and accurately, ensuring that you're transferring all of your dart line markings really nicely and accurately onto your fabric. So we've cut out our pattern pieces now, and we've cut them out of fabric as well, and we've transferred all of the line markings onto our fabric. We're going to start off by sewing up the back bodice, and we're going to sew the darts first. Now if you're not sure how to sew darts, please refer to video 22, which talks all about how to sew darts really nicely and accurately. Let's sew those up together now. Next, just press all of those darts towards the side seam. Okay, here comes the fun bit. Let's see what we need to do with this. So let's take our pattern piece off. And on the other side, on the wrong side of the fabric, effectively, I've got my dart lines. So the first thing I want to do is close up this dart here. So let's move that around and just line up that dart beautifully. So we're going to sew up there now. On the back at the bottom, it's not quite matching up, and that's okay because we've got a diagonal line that's coming down that way, so we're not expecting it to match up absolutely perfectly, but it is matching up within the seam allowance. Now, before we take this any further, I'm going to just press that dart out towards the side seam before I then sew up the rest of the darts. Wonderful, so that's now pressed towards one side, and then we basically just want to close up this dart. So let's do that. Start by pinning the top of the dart because you know where that is. And then for me, I've actually transferred the seam allowance lines, as you can see in red dotted line, across onto both sides of the dart, just to make sure that I'm pinning it really nice and accurately. It just helps with the pinning process, doesn't it? Now, obviously it's going to kind of crank out along this side here a little bit after the dart. Lovely. Okay, great. So now I can start from the end and sew towards the point. Wonderful. So we're going to open that up and we're then just going to press that seam allowance down. It's looking quite cool, isn't it? Right, let's put the rest of this top together now, and we're going to do right sides together, put the back over the front, and then just pin the side seams in place. Repeat that process for the other side, making sure that you've got your right sides together. So it's time now to sew our 4 seams together using our standard 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. I am obviously using contrasting thread throughout the whole of this sewing process, just so you can see it like really nicely and clearly on the screen. Brilliant, you just now need to press those seam allowances open, all 4 of them, and then we're going to go and try this on and see what you think. So what do you think about that? A very, very different kind of dart manipulation, but as you can see, the volume of the top has been taken out beautifully. So it's going to create a really nice, different and unique look. Isn't it interesting how you can manipulate darts to create such incredibly different aesthetics? But no matter what you're doing, that kind of maths of removing volume, taking it out of one place, moving it to somewhere else, just works so beautifully. Why don't you let us know in the comments below which one's your favourite dart manipulation process, which location you preferred the most. Was it this one, the asymmetric one? Was it maybe the princess seam? Or was it maybe the French dart? Who knows which one's your favourite? Let us know in the comments. We always love to hear from you. So this actually completes our little mini-series all about dart manipulation. Hope you've really enjoyed that and you feel like you've learned a lot, that you understand the process of moving things around and moving volume from one place to another and the visual impact that that makes. Thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva and I will see you next time.